Alright, so we just had our first Apple event of the year, the April 20th event. Yes, 420, funny number. I made an entire video on everything that was released at that event, which you can check out in the icon above, right here. I'm confident it is this side. But this video is focusing specifically on the M1 iPad Pro. So let's start off with Mission Implausible, which was Apple's funny, sort of debuting, I'll say, quote-unquote ad that they had where the guy went into Apple Park, stole the M1 chip out of a MacBook, brought it back, put it in an iPad Pro, and revealed himself to be Tim Cook. Best Apple ad ever, 10 out of 10, totally the best. But now let's actually talk about the M1. So, if you're not familiar, the M1 was Apple's first ever ARM-based processor in a Mac laptop. So this came out with the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, and Mac Mini that were released last November. And they were basically like a bulldozer compared to pretty much every other PC or laptop that were competing with them. They were extremely fast while also being extremely efficient. So now that this is on iPad, that's pretty good news because this is already so ahead in the PC market, and iPads were already so ahead in the tablet market, and now that you just add this, that's like, there's nothing that can even compete with it. But while this sounds really great when it comes to specs, there are a couple issues in the practical use department. Now, Apple opened up on stage with the iPad Pro saying that it was 1,500 times faster than the first gen iPad.
This iPad Pro now delivers up to 75 times faster CPU performance. The graphics of this new iPad Pro is now over 1,500 times faster.
I mean, what sort of comparison is that? That's literally like saying a cheetah is faster than a snail. It's common knowledge, everybody knows that. But the problem with M1 coming to iPad is that, well, it's an iPad. Or more specifically, it's iPadOS. iPadOS is still just a glorified iOS rather than a true iOS macOS hybrid. And what I'm trying to say is just that the M1 cannot be unlocked to its full potential on an iPad because the iPad is on iPadOS and iPadOS is so limited. I'm not asking to bring macOS to the iPad or anything like that, but what I am asking for is maybe pro apps like Final Cut, Logic, Xcode. If this sort of stuff came to iPad, many people would appreciate it, because the weird thing about the way that the iPad is being marketed is that Apple's sort of trying to market it as a laptop replacement, but then they sell laptops, and they're purposefully withholding features coming to iPadOS because it'll start to maybe cannibalize some of their Mac sales. And that's where the problem is. If iPads are supposed to really be a true laptop replacement, then they need to show some of that. The iPad Pro is completely overkill. Having M1 and an iPad Pro, unless you are doing really intensive tasks on an iPad Pro that require such power. For example, if you are a really hardcore photo editor who loves using Photoshop on an iPad with Apple Pencil, and you can really make use of the faster rendering times to be able to edit photos in real time, sure, an iPad Pro is great for that. But there are plenty of people who just prefer the Macs because, I mean, for $9.99 you get a MacBook Air. For $10.99 you get an iPad Pro, 12.9 inch. It does have a better screen, but now what if I want to use a keyboard and a trackpad with it? That's another $300. It's almost $1,500. Now, the larger 12.9 inch iPad Pro did get mini LED, which is basically combining all the color and contrast benefits of OLED into the reliability of LCD. The display that came to the 12.9 inch iPad Pro has 1000 nits brightness, 1600 nits peak brightness in HDR, a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio, and almost 2600 local dimming zones. And this is great. This is going to especially appeal to people who might want to work outside more. Rather than have a MacBook at only 600 nits of brightness outside, if you get an iPad Pro 12.9 with a Magic Keyboard and your workflow is more of that is that's compatible with an iPad, then this is great. You have up to 1000 nits brightness now, and even more than that when it comes to HDR. This is also great for people who do more photo or video or just color accurate work. For example, editing photos in Photoshop, now you have a more color accurate, a more contrasty, just a much better display. Not to say that the LCD displays on iPads have been bad, just that this is just so much better now. Especially if you are fine with Photoshop on iPad and some of the limitations compared to PC and Mac versions. And I feel like Mini LED is going to be the better selling point over the M1 because it's more useful in much more realistic use cases. Because, I mean, are you going to be editing 8K video on an iPad, or are you more likely going to be doing some light photo editing in Photoshop or Lightroom, or, you know, watching YouTube videos or Netflix shows? And that is where Mini LED offers the real advantage, because you got much more contrast, much better colors, much more brightness, versus the M1, which, it's cool. I mean, definitely we could use it, but with the way that iPadOS is now, and as I speak, we are on iPadOS 14.4.2, it's just not really worth it. When the pro apps like Final Cut, Logic, Xcode, when these do come to the iPad, if or when they do come to the iPad, that's when we can take a look at it and think, well, that might actually be worth it for people who legitimately want to use those apps and can benefit from using those apps on these portable devices and just take it anywhere. And now with the combined benefits of Mini LED, it's going to be great for color grading and doing color accurate work in video editing in like Final Cut. Or especially if you want to work outside, having 1000 nits brightness and up to 1600 with HDR. That's going to become actual real stuff that people will benefit from. And that's when the M1 will actually be worth it. But as of right now, the M1 iPad Pro is the most powerful and most capable iPad ever. But it's still an iPad. It still runs iPadOS, and to put it simply, it's just overkill. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you are still here, thank you for making it until this point in the video. If you did enjoy, please do leave a like and subscribe. Greatly helps me out, and I love to see more people join my small community. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me.